I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the next reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
La Llorona is over. Protect us from all evil. Make all evil go away. And come again some other day. No. La Llorona, Andy, we're talking about this one about the ghosts and witchiness, not all the other ones.
Back to our ghost stories. This is ending our ghost stories series, which really ended up being kind of a story about, I suppose, ghost stories told with a very particular angle. Like I think inadvertently, when I chose the ghost stories, they all are addressing issues, but using ghost stories to handle those issues.
Right. They're all ghost stories, but what word might you use to describe how they are lifted above the rest?
I was trying so hard not to say it, but yeah.
I can't think of the word. It's not coming to me.
Yes, this is what the person who decided elevated horror needed a name. I suppose you could say this is elevated horror.
Drink, everybody, drink.
I
think this is a straight up fascinating movie. Let me just get that out of the way. This is a fascinating movie. Low key on the ghosty effects, but man, it comes to play in terms of haunted staring people and sound design. And straight up production design in this house, how they use the house. I think there's just a lot going on in the movie that I think works really, really well to create a mood. But when you layer on top of it that the guy we're following is a dictator, a military dictator accused of genocide, that's chef's kiss. Perfect. Like, he deserves everything he gets.
Did you watch the oh God, hold on. It wasn't Crapo. I have to look. Best
I haven't seen that. Was it El Crapo?
2022, I think. 2023. No, 2024. Did you watch the film El Conde by any chance? This was a Pablo Larraín film, who, of course, we love talking about. I watched it. It was one of his that he directed that was like a straight to Netflix film. This was a black comedy horror film that he made. And it's black and white. And basically, the satire in the film puts the dictator Augusto Pinochet as a vampire, and it's worth watching. It is a trippy little movie. He basically, he's a loyal French soldier. He finds a vampire, or a vampire finds him, and ends up kind of crossing the seas and ending up in Chile, and joins the army and rises to become this general and everything. And it's kind of like after all of this, after he's now just living at his place, everything is kind of over, and he's trying to figure out like what to do now. Is kind of the story. It was.
I just want to talk about that movie now.
Well, it's definitely worth checking out. It is a strange little movie, but I couldn't help but think of it when I started this one, and I had a sense as to where this film was going to go, and just kind of the sense of it. And I'm finding that there's this interesting way to start approaching these types of horrific stories. You know, in our pre-show chat for members, we talked about films that deal with military dictatorships and in South American and Latin American countries. And generally, those films that we talked about were pretty straightforward. Like, they were just, they're films that depict the situation in a realistic way, just so we can get a better sense as to like the horrors of what people were going through. what I'm finding so fascinating about La Llorona and then also El Conde, in both cases, the filmmakers have decided, you know what, I'm going to play with genre convention and take these films in a different direction, still addressing the horrors and everything that they've brought to their countries, but doing it in a way that shakes things up and isn't just a straight up storytelling of just what happened. And I found it so interesting watching La Llorona as we really start to get a sense of who this dictator in Guatemala had been and what he had been doing. Like it's clear as we watch the film and then as you read about it, basically genocide on the native Mayan people, the Cachiquel people who lived in different parts of Guatemala, who the military dictatorship and this general decided, you know, we're just going to wipe them out. And this is a story about these people and the memories and the haunting nature of what happens, but told in such a fascinating way. I was so taken by the film and the haunting nature of it. And yeah, like you said, these people who just stare, it really got under my skin. And I just found it to be incredibly effective.
What's interesting about it is it didn't get under my skin in the way most ghost stories get under my skin. As you know, I'm not a huge fan of ghost stories. And this one, I never felt that level of anxiety because of the perspective that was established so early on by the conceit that it's not a haunting sort of writ large. It's this guy. This guy was a bad guy, and he's the one who's reckoning with his actions by way of, in the film, the ghosts and what he sees. But that perspective shift, making him both the target, the victim, and the threat, I think made the movie easier to watch and put me in a position of being sort of viscerally satisfied when he gets a comeuppance, like when he is put in a position where he's backed into a corner, because the movie starts with him backed into a corner, right? The movie starts and he is going into trial, waiting for his judgment, whether he's guilty of this. And so I'm already on the edge of my seat, just waiting for him to get comeuppance number one. Doesn't even lead to it doesn't even take into account all of the psychological comeuppance that comes his way through the course of the movie. And I think that's the interesting thing. Like, you can read this movie as, you know, all of the ghosts being his sort of psychological reckoning with his own deeds, or kind of fun to see it as an actual haunting and how he meets his end. Either way, I feel like I'm I feel like I'm a booster for it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's because I think it gives us a just kind of a different take on a story like this. I mean, you know, I was reading about, you know, this general. It's based on General Efrain Rios Montt, who had been the Guatemalan dictator and president, de facto president from 82 to 83, before he himself ended up getting overthrown by his general, his defense minister. And, you know, he had committed some terrible, terrible atrocities. And then later, this is like much later, in 07, he announced he was going to run for Congress. And but then he ended up, he had immunity for, I don't know, that I can't go through the entire history of everything that happened, but basically his immunity ended in 2012, and then he was put on trial for genocide and crimes against humanity. And the movie very much patterns itself after that. Like, he was found guilty, and then immediately the Supreme Court, I think, or no, it's the Constitutional Court, overturned that conviction. And so we're essentially seeing that play out in the film here, right? Like, the film starts at the end of his trial when they say you're guilty, and then immediately they find out that the Constitutional Court overruled, and now he's free. But of course, that really creates this uprising with all of the people, and that's why we have the film set in their house the way we do, because they can't get out, right? They're
he's not
pinned down.
free. Right.
Right. They're completely, he and his family are completely pinned down. And so it forces us into essentially a haunted house setting where he and his family are coming to terms with the realities of what had happened. And we see that through the family, right? Like, he isn't really coming to terms. We know he's sick. He is still drawn to Native women, as his wife says. His wife is coming to terms with the fact that he's always been drawn to these Native women, but it's clear she's kind of closed herself off to the realities of him having actually done anything, and she kind of keeps that wall up. But she finally admits to their daughter that she thinks that their loyal servant, their housekeeper, is his illegitimate child, and she is half Native Mayan, and so that's why her mom really thinks that why she's sticking around. All of the other servants quit, but this one sticks around. And then we have this mysterious other one show up, and she starts talking to the granddaughter and working to have her learn how to hold her breath for a long time, which we find out why at the end of the film, right? And so we're starting to get this sense that all of these people, particularly the women, are figuring out how to come to terms with the realities that either they didn't know or they had kind of been in denial about. And I mean, the film starts with the women. They're in like a prayer circle sort of thing. As he's getting ready for this final ruling to be read. And we're really following them through the course of the film, the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter, and how all of this, and their reaction to all of this, and understanding what really happened with these people. And I think that was, for me, such a key part of it. It was a part of it. I definitely want to talk a little bit about the complicit nature that the women may have had in all of this, just by not saying anything. But I think for the bulk of the story, though, it was really about them coming to terms with what he had done.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Can we start just quickly with your read on Alma? Alma is the new housekeeper with a mysterious past, and she's the one who's sort of manipulating, and pulling all the threads to lead to the final sort of confrontation, or the final collapse of the general's, psyche. Who is Alma?
Well, and I think it's interesting because Alma to me seems like she is the La Llorona, the weeping woman. She is kind of essentially embodies that concept of this spirit, right? She is a ghost who had been a victim of the general, as we kind of get a sense of in that final, as the grandma starts having dreams, we start getting a sense of, the grandma is having dreams, putting herself, or Alma is putting her into a space to understand where Alma came from, right? So we're seeing her and her children hiding in a cornfield, running into their place to hide from these military men, and getting dragged out, and then basically getting told at gunpoint, as her kids are dragged out to a river, we're going to drown your kids unless you tell us where all of the guerrillas are hiding. And she's just like, I don't know. I just don't know. They drown her kids, and she looks up, and it's, of course, the general at the end of the gun. And so we now have a sense, this is all, of course, spoiling the entire climax of the film, but it's essentially...
It's what we do.
You. Spoiler alert. I spoiled it. It is we're getting this sense of the trauma that these people have faced in all of this, and how, in some sense, she represents all of these spirits that are haunting them, that are haunting this place. As the over the course of the film, we start seeing it starts with her, but then there's this man who's standing out in the crowd, and they see him on one of these missing posters that had been thrown into the house. And then by the time we get to the end, the entire yard is full of all of these people that are just standing and staring, the ghosts of all of the missing. And I think that's in a large part the what we're getting here is that she in many ways just represents the horrors of the past. And it's one of those ghost stories where, you know, she's basically a physical person in the space here, but she is a ghost, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad to hear you say all of that, because that's what I got too. And I was just a little nervous because when you watch a movie like this that is so austere on the VFX front, right? There's nothing ghostly particularly about her or all the people in the yard, right? There's nothing, they don't walk through walls. There's nothing that makes them phantasmagorical, right? They just look like people. But being able to see what they represent to our protagonist is what becomes key. And well, or to the general, I should say, is what becomes key, because that, like, those moments where, you know, he's caught staring at her naked in the bath, that is just as effective as her having walked right through him, right? He is so traumatized by being caught. He can't breathe. He can't, like, it's just too much for him, too much overstimulated. And I think that makes it really fascinating. I think that the whole idea of these ghosts being representations, I think that when the daughter was, as you said, picking out the faces that were on the missing posters, making that sort of a Where's Waldo of who are these people? You know, it's the experience of, like, once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. And that's his experience of trauma. And I guess I'm left with the question, do you think he actually ever ended up feeling regret?
I don't know if he I don't know if he recognized it, and you know, and I think it's interesting because in some ways the same holds true with Efrain Rios Montt, the dictator I was talking about, because he also was very ill, and with the back and forth of all the trials and everything, he was they ruled him to come back to court and everything, but then he ended up he was mentally deteriorating by that point, and then he died of a heart attack, and they just kind of ruled that, you know, that everything was closed. And so we kind of are getting that here. And I think it's interesting. I didn't get a real sense that he fully regretted his actions. He never comes to a point where he recognizes Alma as someone that he killed. Right. That never happens. But what I think ends up happening over the course of the film is we are given a sense that the family they're the ones, like, he'll never change, but the family is the one who recognizes what has happened, to the point where his wife, the grandma, kills him, like she strangles him to death. And I think that was so fascinating to watch them make the turn as they realize the horrors that people always have talked about, but they've always denied. But no, he really did do all of those things. It wasn't just some political thing that people were saying. And I think that's what made the film work for me, is that he truly always is the villain and doesn't get a chance to clear his name or feel better about himself.
Yeah, right? Like, I think that's interesting because he's not a changed character in the film, but what the rest of the film is, as you said earlier, I mean, it's these women working together, and they come to terms at their own pace by the end at the same time with their intergenerational trauma, right? Like, with their understanding of what their family hath wrought. And that is the balance of justice is made equal when she comes out of her vision. She lunges for him when she's in the flashback or vision on the riverside and lands on him in the house and strangles him to death. And that's that ultimate execution is the answer to the question: will there, does justice mean anything really? And in this case, I think maybe not. I think maybe it's hollow justice. Like he is gone. He's never going to do anything again, but his death never brings those people back, and it never does it ever really resolve the haunting of his deeds. And I don't know that it does. I think that's one of the things that makes it such an interesting film, something that's hard to reckon with when you come from where we come from.
Well, and I think it also speaks to just the nature of how often these sorts of situations don't have the resolution that everybody's hoping for. Like clearly in Guatemala, they never had the resolution. The people never had closure with him being found guilty. Well, he was found guilty, but then it was immediately overruled. And then he never actually had to deal with any consequences. And I think that's what this film is, for me, ended up tackling, is like how the other people in those in the family end up finding a way to tackle it themselves. And I don't know if the real general's family ever had to kind of deal with things on their own. But I think the way that it's handled in the film allowed for the grandma, the mom, the daughter to have a recognition as to the horrors that had been committed, and at least find a way to start their own healing, but also recognition of, and I think this is the part that for me the ghosts kind of represented, recognition by these people who had been killed, like the whole, like almost 6% of the whole population of these people had been killed in this genocide, that actually had happened. And I think that recognition, seeing all those ghosts staring at them, I think puts them in a place where they actually can start understanding what had happened and moving forward in a healthier way.
Yeah. I love how too that recognition of what happened kind of reveals itself or peels itself back from the youngest up, right? Like Sarah is the one who sort of sees them first, maybe for what they are, but not as an awareness that it's connected to her grandfather. Natalia,
although she's the one who asks at the beginning about the grandfather. Like,
you're right. That's
are people saying what is this really what Grandpa did?
That's really true. You're right. She's the very first person to mention it. So really, starting at the bottom up, Nat, we have her awareness kind of in the middle, and she actually has that sort of defensive conversation with her mother in the sea of white chairs, as they call it in Guatemala, and she has that conversation with like, what are we doing? Like this is not right. Like what is happening is not right, as she comes to terms with it. And then eventually it's mom who actually does the deed at the very end. She's the last to come to terms with it. And when she has that conversation on the chaise about like, she's coming to terms with not just what he did, but the fact that he is also a philanderer and has an illegitimate child that's been working for them for 40 years. Like it's like all of those things come to her like an anvil by the end of the movie, and I think it's paced and emotionally paced really well.
Well, and she's the one who ends up with the visions, right? Like,
yes, right.
With Sarah, she's the one who Alma most connects to, and Alma kind of takes her under her wing, is showing her the posters. They're finding the people in the crowd. They're starting to recognize the ghosts and kind of what had happened. She's the one who Alma is taking on as kind of a daughter and saying, you need to learn how to hold your breath. And they're doing these holding your breath competitions just to see how long she can hold her breath. And mom never really gets a vision, but she is the one who most directly is questioning a lot of this stuff as she's seeing Sarah going through this. She's having these questions from Sarah. She's seeing what's going on outside, and she's just actively processing, trying to figure it out. And grandma is the one who seems the most closed off to all of it. And she's the one who's just like, that's just these people are just terrible. They just, they're just communists. And, that she just always has the political excuses to blame them without actually knowing anything that's actually going on. And so she's the one who's given the visions to really thrust herself back into the realities of what her husband had actually done. And I found that to be interesting, the way that each of them came to it in their own way, but it was Grandma who needed a little bit more of a push, you know?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. The so let's talk about the look of the film. Like we've already talked about, it's a low budget movie. It's a movie that capitalizes on mood and vibe. I'm assuming it hit you well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks great. It has a nice kind of period feel to the whole thing. The house that they're in is exactly what you would expect, kind of a presidential home to feel like. You know, it's big. It's got a lot of space. It's got a nice yard. It also has high walls, and that allows for the sound design to really kind of come in constantly with all sorts of sounds from the people beyond. It looked dark and creepy, and it had just a great vibe. They played with water well. I mean, in the story about La Llorona, you talked a little bit about the horror elements not being very visual as far as like the any sorts of effects, but what they do to kind of capture the haunting nature of La Llorona is use water to great effect. Whether it's ghostly water that appears like when Grandpa is following her from the pool and goes into the bathroom, and then suddenly reality strikes, like because the whole tub, like she's in the bath washing out her shirt or her dress, and the bathtub's overflowing, the entire room is full of water, he's wading through the water to get there, all in the vision. But when everybody kind of or when he comes to reality and he finds that everybody has found him staring at her naked in the bathroom, it's dry. And so that's, I thought, what was really interesting is the way that kind of the La Llorona, this weeping woman, the water, the tears, is portrayed as just water sources over the course of the film. And just all of the water was just captured in a haunting way, particularly once, like, she has that frog at one point to kind of lure Sarah out. And then there's that point where he comes out at some point to look at the pool, and it looks like a pool, but when he looks back, it's like, or we're underneath it, I can't remember, but it's all covered in lily pads, and she kind of pokes her head up amongst the lily pads. And so, like, the imagery, the way that Bustamante captured the images, I just thought framed it in a very haunting way, you know?
Long hair in water is beautiful and horrifying,
Yeah.
right? Like, he uses long dark hair in water, the way it spreads out across the surface and sort of becomes tentacles naturally in such a beautiful way. I think all of the water sort of work is captured incredibly, but particularly when Alma's in the water, I think it's really amazing. I love the sort of ingeniousness of Sarah by the end, who, you know, I don't think she did. Did she ever get to 21 on her own? I think she did. She got to
to like
25 or
25 or
something,
26.
27.
Yeah.
But by
Because
the
that was like
end,
when she was panicking underwater and like,
yeah.
and yeah.
And Alma ended up saving her.
Yeah.
Pulling her out. But the finale, where she goes in and takes Grandpa's oxygen, and unplugs it and takes it into the pool with her so she can just be under there indefinitely, is makes for a, again, beautiful night swimming bit of fear. I thought it was just lovely. And again, the sound design you already mentioned, but the idea of the sounds careening, sort of creeping over the wall, always there. I don't think there's a moment of straight silence in the movie. I don't think. I think there's a sound bed under everything.
I feel like there's probably limited as far as,
because
just
even at night,
up, yeah.
they're doing the song, right? They're playing the music, and
Well, it changes constantly. Like sometimes it feels like people, like they're singing, or there's just kind of like a quiet chant going on, or something that sounds not like weeping but like weeping, you know, like there constantly is something happening from the people outside in the courtyard or surrounding the house, and it made for just a real haunting vibe, because it was always present. You always had this this sense of just something else there, something ghostly. The way
Yeah.
that the voices turn into something else when it's that many people, it just
Yeah.
becomes this tone that is just very discomforting.
I thought it was interesting reading about Bustamante wanting to make this movie, wanting to sort of revision the La Llorona story, which is quite present in Guatemalan lore, certainly Latin American lore, to be able to use it to talk about this particular, genocide, because this is the unspoken genocide apparently in Guatemala. And he said this is a way for us to talk about something that we don't talk about as a people. And I thought that was an interesting mantle to sort of take on, that we're going to use this movie as a way to spark dialogue around something that's deeply uncomfortable. I can't immediately think of other movies that seem to have that same sort of gestalt, but I do love the idea of this one doing that. Maybe it's Tony Manero. I don't know.
Well, it is really interesting, and yeah, it's interesting that they call it kind of like the silent Holocaust, with
Mm-hmm.
all of these people, these indigenous people getting killed, and it is incredibly tragic that Guatemala has suffered so much, and that these people, these Mayan people, have gone through so much. It looks like an estimated 200,000 Guatemalans were killed during the war, including at least 40,000 people who, quote, disappeared. And yeah, so it's just, again, it's just one of these things where this ethnic cleansing idea becomes, all part of the game. And it's really horrifying what ends up happening. And I don't know if the actual story of Alma, how she dealt with, or like what happened to her with her kids, like, was that a story that they heard? Even if they made it up just for the context of the film, I can't imagine they had to reach very far to come up with a horrific situation like that. Like,
Yeah,
I just
right.
imagine that you hear stories like this as par for the course under a genocide like this.
Yeah. Man, I just did a quick search for La Llorona in IMDb, and I mean, have you done that yourself? There are a lot of them, and I knew I was making a bit of a joke about finding this particular movie, the 2019 La Llorona, but it turns out that's not even the half of it. There
Oh yeah,
were
no.
one, two, I think three other La Llorona movies also released in 2019, let alone the 60 other La Lloronas that have been, released in some variant since prior, even earlier than 1933, I think is the earliest one that I see. Um,
Yeah.
and I haven't seen, obviously I've seen the one that was tied to, um, was it The Curse of La Llorona?
Yeah, the Ed
Um,
and the one that's tied to I
yeah,
can't remember the universe, but the Ed and Lorraine um, universe,
I, I
whatever
don't
theirs is called.
I, I think the whole point there is I don't know how. I have not seen certainly enough of them to be able to make any educated comment here, but I'm curious to the degree to which other movies in this sort of space use this particular bit of horror and revision it for political context. I think that is the big thing, the big lesson for me in this movie is just how well this movie leans into the politics by way of a horrifying story and tragedy.
Well, and that it is interesting to take some story like La Llorona, which, I mean, it's Mexican folklore, and basically this woman, she's a vengeful ghost, and they say that she is mourning her children whom she drowned in a jealous rage after discovering that her husband had been unfaithful. And when you hear her crying, if you hear her crying, you're going to suffer misfortune or death. And that, more, I don't know if it was completely tackled, um, more directly in the Conjuring. That's what it is, the Conjuring version. But there's an interesting idea of actually adapting that, and I suppose in the scope of something like this, like how do you feel it diminishes the actual folklore and the myth to kind of just use it for something so completely different?
Well, that's the big question, right? Like I don't think it does necessarily, because I think the let's just say the exploits of the general were big enough to merit a big grief heavy allegory. And I think they pair, we'll just say, nicely together. To use this as a way to talk about something else that is horrific, it makes for good metaphor.
Well, I guess I ask because and I don't know if this is a completely apt comparison, but I know, like, in your thoughts on Joker, you said it would have been better if it was just Arthur or something that didn't actually involve the Joker mythology at all. And the idea here is, like, would this have worked fine if it was called, something like, the Dictator and the Ghost or something, that was that didn't actually try to tie in the La Llorona mythology at all.
I think I'm gonna say that that's an unfair comparison because Joker. But I'll tell you, it doesn't hit me the same way. It doesn't hit me the same way because I think we're talking about an atrocity. Okay, here's I think it's coming together. I'm talking through in real time. This atrocity that the general perpetrated on the Guatemalan people, the indigenous people, is so big that it is hard to comprehend the level of grief felt by the people impacted by it. But when you make it the story of a weeping parent over the loss of children, it's something that more people can grasp, that level of grief. And tying those things together allow us to see sort of through a lens in some way that allows us to grapple with the overall context in a way we couldn't before, in both a sort of narrative and a cinematic language that we couldn't before.
Right, but does it have to be La Llorona? Could it still be a haunting, a ghost story sort of film that doesn't take this mythical character, this ghost, in this capacity?
I guess the short answer is no. It doesn't have to be. But I can sort of see why finding another meaningful bit of lore that is something that people of this have this sort of shared cultural heritage around this lore. People know this ghost story, can adapt it to what really happened. That makes sense to me, right? Like in so many ways, Bustamante is not making this movie for me. Right. Like, he's making this movie for people who know both stories or who know one and need to know the other.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just playing devil's advocate. I just think it's interesting. I thought it was a perfect way to take this this concept of this ghost that in reality is more vengeful. She drowned her own children and is a sign of coming doom. I think that it's interesting the way that they modified that myth into something that works to represent these Mayan people in all of the trauma that they've suffered, and now that essentially they're bringing impending doom, specifically Alma, to the people who committed these crimes. And as opposed to being vengeful, jealous of her husband drowning her own children, now she is angry at the people who probably, let's just say, killed her husband, drowned her children, and then killed her. Like, I think that's I like the way that they shift that. She's still vengeful, because at the very end of the film, she's not done with this general. We see at the very end of the film, one of these other generals at the funeral goes into the bathroom and suddenly starts hearing the weeping and the water starts rising in the bathroom. So we know she's not done.
She's not done. Right. It's great. Do you think that, oh man, I had the question right as you were saying it. What were you just saying? Oh, okay. Do you think that do you think that Bustamante is making the case to keep in line with the lore that mom effectively killed her own kids by watching them be drowned and not giving up the location of the, of the indigenous people, the gorillas?
Well, that implies she knows where they are, right?
It does.
And I don't know if we're given any sense that she actually knows where they are. It's possible.
Oh, totally fair.
Yeah. It is possible that she knows and refuses to give them up, and by doing so leads to the death of her own children and then herself. But also, I kind of have a feeling even if she knew and she gave up where their location was, that they probably were going to kill all of them anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
that's true. It's just a matter of agency, right? Like to keep in line with the sort of spectral metaphor with the story. Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably true of any parent in any situation where their children end up getting murdered. Every parent probably goes through, what could I have done? How did I end up in this situation where I could not protect my own children?
Right.
Whether it was in your power or not, I guarantee every parent has those thoughts. Like, what did I do? I shouldn't have taken a left. I mean, it could be just a simple thing, or it could, I shouldn't have opened the door or whatever, but it's always going to be that thing that, how could I have, like, what did I do wrong that led this to happen to my kids?
Absolutely. I'm feeling it right now. I don't even know what it's about. I just feel it.
That's just, I mean, it's so tragic. Like, and that's the thing, like, I can't even imagine, what these people, anyone who has gone through a genocide has had to deal with in the scope of coming to terms with the atrocities that other people commit. I mean, totally unrelated to this particular, thing happening here. But I mean, we talked about Sophie's Choice on this show a long time ago in our Meryl Streep series, and that was something that her choice that she had to go through in that film was a horrific one that was forced upon her by terrible people, and it's a thing that she is now dealing with for the rest of her life and coming to terms with, how could I have made that choice? And it's just like, a parent will always blame themselves, even if there was nothing in their power to stop them.
Yeah. Parents, man. Tough duty.
It's yeah. No, it is interesting. Have you watched anything else of Bustamante's? Or have you looked at any more at kind of what his films are?
I don't think so. I picked my way through some of the other films that he's written.
He's only made 4 films. This was the third. He started with Ixcanul in 2015, which, again, his focus really seems to be telling these stories about these Cachiquel people, like these Mayans, like that seems to be kind of the direction of what he's really wanting to do. It was 2015, and then Tremors in 2019, along with La Llorona. I'm not exactly sure how he ended up having the 2 films coming out at the same time. And then most recently, his new film, Rita, I don't think it's had any play yet here in the States, but it's started at... here you go. Yeah, it premiered at the Fantasia International Film Fest in July, and it will be released on Shudder in November 22nd. So,
yeah, it's got some of the shared cast. Sabrina de la Hoz and Juan Pablo Olislegar are in it from this one. Looks interesting.
I mean, based on what you saw here, are you inclined to check any of these other ones out? Are you interested in what Bustamante's doing?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I am. I think I think he's a really interesting, uh, interesting sort of aesthetic, interesting filmmaker, interesting ideas, young guy, like really telling stories that are, like I said, they're so different from my kind of cultural reality that I feel like he's occupying an interesting corner of film for me. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm down. Let's do a series.
After I watched this,
2027.
there you go. After I watched this, I immediately added his other films to my watch list because I find the way that he's crafting his stories to be so thoughtful. Like he definitely is has ideas and wants to explore them in interesting ways. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
I'm good, man.
All right. Well, we'll be right back, but first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson, music by Kyle Preston, Ben Fox, Oriole Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. Is this me?
Oh, it's me.
Okay.
Hold on. Now I gotta figure out where I put it. Where are you? Oh, here we go. Halloween may be over, but that doesn't mean your love for all things spooky, cinematic, and downright awesome has to fade away like a ghostly apparition. In fact, now is the perfect time to keep the spirit of the season alive by incorporating your favorite movie-inspired gear into your everyday look. And when it comes to post-Halloween style, you can find what you need at our Next Reel merch store. With our collection of t-shirts featuring designs from great horror films like Relic, A Streetcar Named Desire mugs, Spicoli Surf School phone cases, John Carpenter filmography tote bags, Akira Kurosawa filmography hoodies, and more, you've got everything you need to keep the cinematic magic alive all year round. Picture this. You're heading to work on a chilly November morning, still feeling that post-Halloween glow. You throw on your Relic t-shirt featuring the film's eerie stained glass imagery, grab your Streetcar Named Desire mug filled with pumpkin spice latte, or filled with a pumpkin spice latte, and head out the door ready to take on the day with a little extra cinematic flair. And when your coworkers ask about your unique style, you can proudly proclaim your love for the Next Reel and all the amazing films we celebrate. Or maybe you're running errands on a crisp autumn afternoon and you want to add a touch of movie magic to your look. No problem. Just toss on your Blood Moon Centennial Celebration phone case, celebrating the film Messiah of Evil, and your John Carpenter filmography tote bag, and you'll be ready to tackle your to-do list in style, all while paying homage to some great films. And when the weather gets I cannot talk today. And when the weather gets a bit colder, you can cozy up in your Akira Kurosawa filmography hoodie, letting the iconic titles from the director's films keep you warm while you binge watch your favorite movies. It's the perfect way to keep the cinematic spirit alive, even as the autumn leaves fall and the days grow shorter. But the real beauty of the Next Reel merch lies in its ability to connect you with a community of fellow film lovers who share your passion for cinema, no matter the season. Whether you're bonding with a coworker over your shared love of Streetcar Named Desire, or striking up a conversation with a fellow Next Reel fan who recognizes your t-shirt with our logo, you'll never feel alone in your devotion to the silver screen. So this post-Halloween season, don't let your love for cinema fade away with the ghostly decorations. Instead, embrace your inner movie geek and wear your passion proudly with the Next Reel's collection of film-inspired gear. You're not just making a fashion statement, you're joining a community of film fans who understand the timeless appeal of great storytelling. And if anyone asks where you got your amazing gear, just give them a knowing smile and say, why, the Next Reel, of course. Because when it comes to celebrating the art of cinema, there's no better place to start than thenextreel.com/merch, no matter what time of year it is.
Why, the Next Reel, of course. Awards, Andy. I know you have done rigorous documentation leading up to this show, and you're going to give us the deets on its copious wins.
This film was very well received. It really struck a chord with the award circuit 28 wins with 60 other nominations.
Oof.
At the Ariel Awards, it was nominated for Best Latin American Film, but lost to The Mole Agent, which was an interesting little documentary. I don't know if you saw that one, but...
Yeah, it's about the dermatologist, right?
Nice. No. Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
It took just the right amount of time. Anyway, Go ahead.
At the Goya Awards, it was nominated for Best Ibo-American Film, but lost to, or from Guatemala, but lost to Memories of My Father from Colombia. At the Imogen Foundation Awards, it was nominated for Best Feature Film. I have to do this. This is such a pain in the ass. It was nominated for Best Feature Film, but lost to I'm No Longer Here. Julio Diaz was nominated for Best Actor, but lost to Demian Bichir in Land. Margarita Kenefik was nominated, but lost to Aubrey Plaza in Black Bear. And Maria Mercedes Coroy was also nominated, but lost to Aubrey Plaza. And Bustamante was nominated for Best Director, but lost to Fernando Frias from I'm No Longer Here. National Board of Review. At the National Board of Review, it won Best Foreign Language Film. At the Venice Film Festival, Bustamante won the GDA Directors Award, and the film won Best Film at Venice Days. And then, of course, at the good old Fangoria Chainsaw Awards, it won Best Foreign Film. So, it had good vibes, I think. People were really tapped into what this film was doing and what Bustamante was doing here.
It may be the most elevated of all the elevated horror that we've talked about. Would you agree?
Take a drink.
Okay, so with all of that detail and numbers on the awards, surely you have the same amount of detail on the numbers. How to do at the box office?
This has been a very difficult series. I don't think I've won at all here. For this film, this lands in that window of those films affected by COVID. First of all, I can't find anything telling me how much Bustamante spent to make this film. It did premiere at the Venice International Film Festival September 1st, 2019, and then continued its festival runs through the end of 2019 and into 2020. It did play in theaters in France, but here in the States, it just landed on the interwebs August 6th, 2020. No idea how well it did either. But for its play in theaters overseas, it looks like it earned maybe 300,000, 366,000, or no, 300,000, which is 366 in today's dollars. Anyway, really not a lot of information. I'm sure it took a big hit thanks to COVID, but we will just never know.
Well, I hope thousands of people watch the movie after listening to the show. It's worth it. It's a good film.
Definitely worth checking out. Yeah, it was a really good time. I mean, it's not a good time. It's not like, it's party. It's not like that. No.
It's not like that kind of a good time.
Yeah, no. Wrong term. But anyway, yes. Strong film.
You go on. Keep talking. You're doing great.
All right. We'll be right back for our ratings. But first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, returning to our found footage series, and still timed for Halloween. It's Patrick Bryce's 2014 psychological horror film, Creep.
To be followed shortly by Weirdo. Okay. The Weeping. Have you heard it? Drifting through the static. A mournful cry echoing from a distant shore. They say La Llorona wanders, searching for what she's lost. Searching for a connection, a lost family, a lost community. Don't be lost. Don't wander alone in the darkness. Find your family, your podcast family. Join the Next Real Family of Film Podcasts membership program right now. Become more than just a listener. Become part of something special. Unlock a world of exclusive content, like bonus episodes that delve deeper into the films we explore. Hear them before anyone else with early access to every episode, and discover hidden treasures within the episodes themselves. Bonus content woven into the very fabric of our discussions. Imagine your own personal podcast feed, a curated stream of cinematic delights, free from the distractions of the mundane world, ad-free versions of our episodes that allow you to immerse yourself completely in the stories we tell. Witness the magic unfold live with access to our live stream recording sessions, and connect with fellow film enthusiasts in our exclusive, triple secret, member-only Discord channels, a sanctuary for your shared cinematic passion. Support the podcast you love. Become a part of the Next Reel family. Don't let the weeping carry you away. Find your place. Find your family. Visit truestory.fm/join to join today. That's nothing to cry about.
I was like, is he trying to make a dolphin call like the first time?
If that's what you got, then, I nailed it.
And then I was like, or is he trying to do like the Mexican sort of like cry?
Did that seem like appropriative crying? That was not my intention.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. All
right. Hold on. All right, Andy, it's letterbox time, I believe. That's what I'm told, that it's time for us to look at our stars and see where we're going to take them from other films and apply to this film, La Llorona. What are you going to do?
I really liked this. I do agree that, with some people online saying, it's a very slow-paced sort of film. It's a slow burn sort of kind of creep, which I really liked. I liked the tone that it took, but I maybe also because of that, I'm not necessarily going to give it 5 stars. 4 stars and a heart, I think, is where I'm sitting with this one.
Just because it's slow?
No, I think just because I'm not exactly sure, but I feel like there's something with the way that the story is told that I think could have allowed for some more ways to develop the haunting nature of it. I mean, it's a tight film. We're talking about 97 minutes. It's not a long film by any stretch. I wonder if there were a few additional things that Bustamante could have included in the way that he told the story. But so it's small things, but it's still, I think, just 4 stars and a heart.
I think for me, and spoiler, I'm going to land at 4 stars and a heart too. I think for me, I love this movie as a political thriller. It's a movie I don't hesitate to recommend to others. I think it is a wonderful film. Where does it fall down in stars? That I don't feel like a changed person as a result of watching this movie. That's kind of what I've come to. My 5-star films, I want to feel like I've learned something about the way I integrate into the world around me. And I don't necessarily get that from this movie. Maybe I will one day, but that's not where I am right now. And it's a great film. It tells a really interesting story about a very dark part of Guatemalan history, for sure. And it does it in a really unique way. And I'd like to see more movies like it.
Yeah. To that end, I mean, it was a great series. A lot of really interesting ways to tell ghost stories that just weren't the expected. So and this was a great way to end it. So
right.
Well, you can. This will be 4 stars and a heart over at our account, The Next Reel, over on Letterboxd. You can find me there at Soda Creek Film. You can find Pete there at Pete Wright. So, what did you think about La Llorona? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel over in our Discord community, where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andrew,
as Letterboxd always doeth.
All right, so there are some good and meaty reviews of this movie.
Yeah, very thoughtful.
I'm gonna go with a 4.5 star from Laird, who says the following. It's funny to me that Criterion Channel has, or at least had, well-known stuff like H.G. Lewis gore movies, bringing trash to the art house snobs, and this slow, austere, long-take supernatural revenge story that could use the kind of exposure Criterion brings to titles is on Shudder, bringing art house to the trash snobs. I see people are ragging on this for not being enough of a horror story when it's about real genocide, and for not being subtle enough when it's about real genocide. I found it totally satisfying. And then something in Spanish that I'm not going to read well. No justicia, no hay paz.
Yeah.
How's that?
That's one of the things that people outside are chanting at one point.
Well, I would have butchered it. So there you go.
You did.
I do think that's really, really funny that Criterion and the Criterion and Shudder comparison. Way to go, Shudder.
Yeah, and Criterion. I mean, they both are doing a great job of celebrating some great things.
Yeah. What do you got?
I've got a 3-star by Amazing Kaiser who says this. Still waiting for La Llorona to do something especially heinous like roast him on Twitter or something.
That's so good. There was one I've already lost, but it's like in times like these, La Llorona is the hero we need.
Right.
Thank you, Letterboxd. You're the best.